She performed an exorcism on her 3-year-old daughter because she believed that she was possessed. 3-year-old Aurelie Proctor lived with her 25-year-old mother, Claudia Hernandez, in San Jose, California. Claudia started believing that Aurelie was possessed because she would wake up in the middle of the night screaming and crying. Aurelie wouldn't stop crying and screaming, and this made Claudia believe that she was possessed somehow. On September 24th of 2021, around 6:30 a.m., Claudia and her brother drove Aurelie to a nearby church to help with her alleged possession. Claudia grabs Aurelie by the neck and the waist and tries to get her to throw up this evil spirit. Claudia's dad was the pastor of that church, and he ends up showing up to help them out. Claudia then puts her fingers down Aurelie's throat, and she ends up throwing up this clear purple liquid. All of this went on for about 12 hours, and just the day before, Aurelie was only given 6 ounces of water. Unfortunately, Aurelie ended up passing away between 6 to 6:30 p.m. Once it was after 8 p.m., Claudia called 911 to report that her daughter had passed away. Once first responders arrived, they noticed that Aurelie had bruising around her eye, neck, and chest. At the time, no one was arrested because there wasn't enough evidence. A few days later, Claudia set up a GoFundMe to raise money for her daughter's funeral, even though she was the one who caused her daughter's death. On January 27th of 2022, Claudia uploaded a video to YouTube addressing the whole situation. She was not remorseful and basically said it is what it is. On January 31st, law enforcement were finally able to arrest and book Claudia into the Santa Clara County Jail because of that video, and on May 13th, her brother and father were arrested as well. They have pled not guilty and remain in jail without bail.
Imagine getting accidentally trapped in an airport for 18 years. It was the 26th of August 1988 in Charles de Gaulle Airport in France. A totally normal day until one man stepped off a plane. His name was Mehran Naziri, and he was originally from Iran. He'd wanted to travel to Europe because he was trying to track down his biological mum. But on his travels, he'd showed up in England and was suddenly stopped in his tracks. It seemed like his documentation had been stolen. He couldn't find his refugee documents anywhere, so they sent him back to France. But when he got there, they wouldn't let him go anywhere. They not only didn't let him get on a plane home, but they didn't even let him out of the door. They were like, sorry, without your documents, you can't even actually leave the airport. What? So he just had to sit on this bench, right, and presumed that somebody would sort it out for him. Like, surely they can't just leave me here forever, right? Well, actually, wrong. They didn't sort the documents. Days went by, weeks, months, and then years. He kind of had no option but to just make the airport his home. Now, it's actually incredibly sad. He had to just wash himself in the toilets there in the public loos. He had to sleep on a bench in front of full view of everybody. I just can't believe this was allowed to happen. He kind of became like part of the furniture. People would buy him like McDonald's and stuff. A French human rights lawyer did try and kind of get involved, but by that point it felt like Mehran had sort of made the airport his home, and he ended up not really wanting to leave until 18 years had passed since he had arrived. Passers-by noticed that he looked distressed. He was kind of doubled over in pain, so they called the ambulance. He was rushed to the local hospital and got urgent medical treatment and was transferred for a few weeks to a hotel near to the airport. And he ended up almost like moving around various different shelters in France, but years later decided to just head back to the airport. It was kind of the only place that felt like home for him. Sadly passed away in 2022 from natural causes, but interestingly was found with thousands of pounds in cash. It was the money he'd been paid by DreamWorks for the rights to use his story loosely in a Steven Spielberg film, The Terminal, starring Tom Hanks.
Police would find him naked, covered in blood, hanging over a man, chewing his face off, and then eating it. Without a doubt, this is one of the most disturbing cases that I have ever covered. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murders of Michelle Michon and John Stevens. 53-year-old Michelle and 59-year-old John were a retired couple living together in Florida. They would be described as very outgoing and friendly, they were kind, and they were the type of people who would always give you a helping hand when you needed it. In general, everyone who spoke about the couple said that they were genuinely just very good people. You would often catch them sitting in their garage with the garage door open while watching the TV, and they would do this so that they could wave at their neighbours as they walked by. And that is exactly what they were doing on the 15th of August 2016 when they were barbarically attacked by Austin Harrouff. Austin was a 19-year-old student attending Florida State University where he was studying exercise science. Growing up, he had a very typical, normal childhood. His parents divorced when he was a teenager, and so him and his younger sister stayed living with their mum. However, they were still very much involved with their dad. As he went through school, Austin would become the target of severe bullying. He was bullied because he had acne and because he was slightly overweight. As he grew older, however, he developed a passion for health and fitness. He completely changed his lifestyle. He was eating healthily, he was exercising, he got into really good shape, and he even joined the football team. When he started uni, he would join a frat house, and for that first year, he really immersed himself in the university experience, which meant he was doing a lot of partying, a lot of drinking, he was using drugs, and he would just go completely off the rails, acting the goat, and would drink until he completely blacked out. In his second year, though, he didn't want to continue like that. He really wanted to get back to his healthier self, and so he cut all of that out and he actually took up bodybuilding. He would refuse to put anything in his body that he didn't consider good, healthy, or natural. He really treated his body like a temple. Austin would document some of this fitness journey through YouTube videos, and watching some of them, you can see that as the videos go on, he does start to change. At the end of one of his videos, he just finishes off the vlog by screaming into the camera. Over the summer break in 2016, Austin would go and visit his girlfriend who lived in Tampa, Florida, and after he came back from this trip, he came back like a complete different person. He was like a stranger to everyone around him. When asked about this sudden change, Austin would reassure people, telling them that he was evolving into a different person, that he had found his purpose and that he knew his mission. And this went so far that it got to a point where he was genuinely acting delusional. One minute he thought he was Jesus Christ and could perform miracles such as blessing water, and then the next minute he thought that he was a dog or a horse. He developed a true fear, terror even, of the devil, and he started seeing demons all around him. In fact, in his home where he lived with his mum, he moved out of his bedroom into the family's garage because there were demons in his room. Despite this move, however, it didn't improve Austin's sleeping pattern. At this moment in time, he was rarely sleeping, getting about 2 hours a night, if that. Austin had a job working within a dentist, and he would make some of the clients really, really uncomfortable. He would insert himself into their lives, trying to deal with all of their problems and probing, asking really uncomfortable and evasive questions, either not caring or acknowledging the boundary that he was clearly crossing. He would make considerably strange Google searches, searching things such as, quote, selling my soul to the devil, and, quote, I think I'm going crazy. Alongside this, he would send very strange text messages. Shortly before the crime, he texted his own mother saying, quote, no matter what I say to you, I am protecting you, even when you think I'm evil. On the 15th of August 2016, Austin would run like a dog on his hands and his feet on all fours over 3 miles to his dad's house where he was going to pick up his car. Upon his arrival at his dad's house, his dad did not want to hand over the car keys. Austin and his behaviour had drastically changed since he came back from Tampa. However, the past couple of days especially, he was acting even more erratic, paranoid, anxious, on edge than he usually was. Upon his dad's refusal to hand over the car keys, Austin went absolutely ballistic. He climbed on top of the car and started jumping up and down on it while screaming until his dad finally handed the keys over. Later, he would go to a frat party, and Austin was still sober, so he wasn't going to be drinking. However, at one point during the party, he cracked open a can of beer and then poured it over his hand, saying that his hand needed a drink. He was just making no sense whatsoever and just seemed completely gone. That evening, he would go out for a meal with his family, and at one point he just stood up and ran out of the restaurant in a terrified, panicked state because he felt trapped. He would continue to just sort of run around the area with no rhyme or reason or sense of direction. He was running and running up until in the distance he spotted a shadowy figure, believing that it was a demon. Upon seeing this, he came over absolutely terrified, spun on his heels and sprinted away looking for help. That is when he would come across Michelle and John, who were sat in their garage with the door open as they were watching the telly. Austin would leg it towards the couple, and I can imagine that he looked really scary. He was frantic, he was raving about demons, and he was sprinting towards Michelle and John. Upon seeing this, Michelle screamed in terror, and that made Austin think that she was a demon as well. Using a knife that he brought with him, he began to frantically attack the couple, repeatedly stabbing them and stabbing them in a ferocious frenzy. This is a knife that he had bought just a couple of days prior. John managed to get him out of the garage, and the two men would struggle on the driveway until eventually, just as he had with Michelle, Austin stabbed John to death. At some point after, he went and combed around and found a bottle of bleach and would just drink it. He entirely necked this bottle of bleach. A neighbour called Jeff would hear all of the commotion going on outside, and so he went outside to see what was going on, and that is when Austin charged at him as well. Austin began to frantically stab Jeff, likely trying to kill him as well, but luckily Jeff managed to slip away and get back into the house, where he called 911 for help. That wouldn't be the only call made to 911 regarding Austin that evening. His own mother had actually called up already. He was obviously mentally unwell, and his mental health had been drastically declining. He was awaiting seeing a therapist, however, over the past few days, and then this day especially, his mum was so worried about him that she thought she had no other option but to contact the police. When officers arrived responding to Jeff's 911 call, they would walk into a scene that was nothing short of barbaric, sadistic, and traumatizing. A virtually naked Austin was leaning over John's body and ripping his face off with his teeth, biting away at the flesh, eating it, all while making animalistic noises. He was being so ferocious when he was tearing the skin off of John's face that the officers could actually hear the skin tearing away. It would take 4 officers, a dog, and a taser to get Austin off of John's body. Once they managed to pull him away, he turned to one of the officers and said, quote, "Help me, I've eaten something bad." He then went to say that it was humans while he still had flesh in his teeth. Austin would go through a mental health evaluation where he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features and acute manic disorder. He would accept a plea deal which saw him being found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was deemed criminally insane at the time of the crime. This was absolutely infuriating for Michelle and John's family, who feel like no one has taken responsibility for their actions or lack of actions, aiming that at Austin's parents. Austin Haroof was sentenced to be detained within a mental health facility until he is no longer deemed a risk to the public.
This guy murders his childhood best friend and claims that he did it all while sleepwalking. So it's a random Saturday morning in Florida, and 24-year-old Randy Herman's eyes snap wide open, and he immediately knows something is horrifically wrong because he is absolutely covered in blood. And not just a little bit, I mean his hands are sticky, his arms, his chest, everything is completely drenched in it. And as his brain is trying to make sense of what he's seeing, his eyes suddenly drift down to the floor, and there's a body face down right at his feet. And Randy's whole body just goes cold. But then as he's looking at this body even more, he's seeing these like super deep gashes carved into her palms and fingers. And Randy is just so confused. He's practically frozen in place, trying so hard to breathe and understand what is happening. And so that's when he musters up the courage to lean down and force himself to turn her head and see who this is. Like, is this an intruder? But at first, he can't even tell who it is because her features are completely unrecognizable from all of the cuts. But then after getting a better look, Randy's stomach drops because he knows who this is. This is Brooke Preston, not some stranger, not some random person who broke into his house. This is his friend since they were literally kids. The girl who used to ride bikes with him around the neighborhood, who knew every single embarrassing story from his childhood. I mean, what is going on here? Who did this to her? His brain is just trying to grasp onto anything, any memory of what could have happened. But all he remembers is texting Brooke earlier that day so she can come over and pick up a t-shirt that he really wanted to give her before she moved to Buffalo. And he remembers telling her that he might be asleep when she arrives, so just wake him up. But that's it. And to make things even worse, Randy realizes that he's holding on to something. He hadn't even noticed it because his brain was drowning in shock. But now he looks down at his right hand and sees his hunting knife gripped in his fist with the blade completely covered in red. And Randy is standing there realizing, oh my God, I think I did this. But that's when this incredibly sharp pain just hits him, like this burning, stinging sensation running across his chest and down his arm. arms. And Randy looks down on himself, and that's when he sees these long, jagged scratch marks on his skin. It sort of looked like him and Brooke got into this violent, desperate fight, like she was clawing at him, fighting for her life, trying to get away from him. But he doesn't remember any of it. And at some point, Randy realizes he cannot stay in this house anymore. He cannot look at Brooke's body for one more second, let alone come to the realization that he somehow did this. So he stumbles to the couch, grabs a blanket, and drapes it over her body, covering her face, her wounds, the blood, everything. Then he runs to the bathroom, drops the knife on the counter, and turns on the faucet on full blast. And he just starts desperately trying to get all of the blood off him, but there is just way too much. So he does the best that he can, walks back out to his bedroom, and puts on the cleanest clothes that he can find. Then he finds Brooke's car keys sitting on the counter, and so he grabs them and runs straight outside to her car. Where is he going? He has no idea, but he just knows that anywhere is better than here. So Randy gets into Brooke's car, and eventually, about half a mile from his house, he pulls into this empty park for some reason. And at some point, he's like, I can't do this. So he pulls out his phone and calls 911. And he just says, someone's been murdered. And the operator is like, okay, sir, where are you? Who's hurt? What happened? And Randy, with this slow, heavy breath, says, just send the police. It was me. I'm sorry. And within minutes, patrol cars rush to the parking lot and they cuff him. And one of the officers is like, where's the victim? And Randy, barely above a whisper, says, my house. Someone is badly hurt there. That's a way to put it, I guess. So officers follow Randy's direction back to his place, and the second that they step through the front door, the smell is what hits them first. And if you've never been around a crime scene, there is just no way to describe it. It's just wrong. The kind of smell that immediately tells you something terrible happened here. And so these officers are seeing bloody footprints everywhere, and I'm not exaggerating. It's leading from the living room to the bathroom, back to the bedroom, back to the living room. It was like an entire map of Randy's movements through the house after it happened. And there, in the middle of the living room floor, they see a body covered by a blanket. And so the officers walk over and they slowly pull back the bedsheet. But what they were staring at was so much darker than anything they could have imagined. Because Brooke had been stabbed over 25 times, all over her body, her face, her neck, her stomach, to the point where if you didn't know her, you wouldn't even know this was a person. And all these officers are standing there probably wondering the same thing. What the hell would make Randy do this? So at some point, police take Randy down to the police station and they place him in one of those interrogation rooms to question him. And these two detectives sit directly across from Randy, who is just sitting there, completely hunched over, staring at his feet with tears streaming down his face. And he keeps muttering over and over in this broken voice, I'm a bad person, I'm sorry, I'm a bad person. And for 2 hours, they go back and forth with him, trying to piece together a timeline, trying to find a motive, trying to understand how a guy with no history of violence could do something this brutal to his childhood friend. And that's when Randy basically tells them that ever since he was a kid, he used to sleepwalk. And so that must have been what happened here. And these detectives are staring at him like, my guy, sleepwalking? That's your best story? At least lie and say that it was self-defense or something. I mean, to do this much harm to someone while sleeping is basically unheard of. 25 wounds, defensive wounds all over her hands, a full violent struggle that left scratch marks all over Randy's entire body. There is just no way that someone does all of that in their sleep and doesn't wake up. So detectives start digging deeper, trying to piece together what actually happened that night. And what they discover paints a completely different picture than what Randy ever told them. Because the truth is, what went down didn't start Saturday morning when Randy suddenly woke up covered in blood. It actually started the night before. So on Friday night, March 24th, 2017, 21-year-old Brooke came over to her childhood friend Randy's house to spend one last good weekend with him before she moved out for good. She had been living with him for a while now, but she was in the process of packing up all of her stuff and moving away to Buffalo to start fresh with her boyfriend. And that night, they decided to hit the beach together, just hang out like they used to when they were kids. They brought champagne and beer with them just to chill and have a good last night. And at some point, as the sun is setting over the water and the waves are crashing crashing behind her, Randy takes this picture of Brooke standing in the water with her hands thrown up into the air, and she's holding a beer, just smiling at the camera. She looks so happy, so free, like she's celebrating this new chapter of her life that's about to start. And nobody knew it then, but this would be the last photo ever taken of Brooke Preston alive, because less than 24 hours after Randy took this picture, Brooke would be dead. So they get back to Randy's place later that night, and this is where things start going sideways, because Randy just starts drinking heavily. Like, we're talking about 30 beers throughout the day. And Brooke's just watching him, probably thinking this is just normal Randy getting wasted like he sometimes does. But the more Randy drinks, the weirder he's getting, more aggressive. He's saying things that are making her uncomfortable, crossing boundaries that makes her skin just crawl. And she gets this feeling in her gut that something is off tonight, something different. So Brooke pulls out her phone and texts her friend Kyle saying, just come get me. I'm so ready to kill Randy right now. He's pissing me off. And Kyle immediately rushes over to pick her up, and when he gets there, Randy is absolutely trash. He is stumbling around the entire house, slamming fridge doors, pretty much just being annoying. And Brooke's like, okay, I need to grab my stuff and get out of here now. Like, I'm not dealing with this. So she tells Kyle to just give her a second while she heads to her bedroom to pack a bag and get the hell out. And so she walks over to her closet to grab some clothes. She reaches for the door handle, pulls it open, and the moment that she does, her entire body just freezes, because Randy is just standing there inside of her closet, completely naked, just staring directly at her with his fingers pressed to his lips, going shh. And in that moment, she doesn't scream, doesn't say anything. She just backs away from the closet, grabs her phone, and she practically runs out of that house directly towards Kyle's car. And instead of spending the weekend with Randy, she just decides to stay at Kyle's place that night and leave to Buffalo the next day, because after that stunt that Randy just pulled, there is no way she's gonna stay under the same roof as him. But the next morning at around 7:45, the day that Brooke would lose her life, she wakes up to a text from Randy. He's basically asking her to come over again before she leaves for Buffalo, because he has a t-shirt that he wants to give her for a friend. It's just a simple favor, right? Just come grab this t-shirt really quickly before you leave town forever. And Brooke's probably thinking, okay, he's sober now. Last night was just drunk Randy being an absolute idiot. So at around 8:35 a.m., she heads over to Randy's place. She walks inside and sees Randy in his room. He hands her the t-shirt and she goes up to give him one final goodbye hug. But only 14 minutes after Brooke walked through that front door, neighbors hear this blood-curdling scream coming from Randy's house. It was Brooke screaming for her life, fighting and clawing and desperately trying to get away from somebody that she thought she could trust. And that's when Randy claims that his eyes suddenly snapped open to finding himself standing over Brooke's body covered in blood, not remembering a single thing about what he'd just done. But here's the massive problem with Randy's whole sleepwalking murder story. When detectives sat down across from him in that interrogation room and he told them about this whole sleepwalking thing, they immediately found it impossible to believe. Because according to Randy's own timeline, he was fully awake at 8:35 when Brooke arrived at his house. And then just 14 minutes later, at 8:49 a.m., when neighbors heard Brooke screaming, Randy is claiming that he had somehow fallen into deep enough sleep to start sleepwalking and violently attack her. These detectives are looking at Randy thinking, you're seriously asking us to believe that you fell into REM sleep, the deepest stage of sleep where sleepwalking actually occurs in 14 minutes? That is medically impossible, because it takes the human brain at least 90 minutes to even reach that sleep state. And even worse, what happened in that house wasn't some quick, confused moment where maybe he pushed Brooke and she hit her head or something tragic like that. No, he stabbed her 25 times all over her body, and every single time that knife went through Brooke's body, Randy would have felt it, like really felt the physical resistance of what he was doing. And it gets even crazier to believe his story, because Brooke wasn't just lying there passively letting this happen to her. She was literally fighting for her life with absolutely everything she had left in her. And he's seriously telling us that he slept through all of that chaos? Yeah, I'm not buying that story for a second. So if this wasn't actually a case of Randy sleepwalking like he claims, then what was it? Why would he do something this horrific to his childhood friend? Think about the timeline here. Less than 12 hours before Brooke died, she was so uncomfortable with with Randy's drunk behavior that she literally had to text a friend to come and rescue her from his house in the middle of the night. And as a woman, there's only really one thing that I can think of that would have made her feel that uncomfortable and unsafe around somebody that she has known her entire life. Randy was most likely trying to flirt with her, trying to make romantic or sexual moves that cross major boundaries. Randy most likely had a crush on Brooke for a really long time, probably years at this point, because they were living together under the same roof, seeing each other every single day, and he probably wanted to be with her romantically, wanted to date her and be intimate with her, but he was stuck in the friend zone watching her be with somebody else. But now that Brooke's leaving forever, moving all the way to Buffalo to start a whole new life with her boyfriend, Randy probably figured, oh my god, this is my last chance to see if she likes me back. And that would most likely explain why he went inside her closet that night. In his drunk mind, he probably thought she'd be like, oh my god, Randy, I never realized I had feelings for you. Yes, let's do it right now. But obviously it backfired horribly. So now Randy's sitting there alone the entire night, completely humiliated by what just happened and how Brooke reacted to him. So I think when Randy invited Brooke over that next morning, he purposely grabbed that hunting knife that he kept on his nightstand and took her life right there in his house. In the end, when the case went to trial, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And to this day, sitting in that prison cell, Randy still maintains that he was completely asleep when he murdered Brooke Preston, and he has absolutely no memory of killing her. But be honest, do y'all believe him? That is all that I have for today. I love y'all. Mwah. Group hug.
She sent bizarre text messages to her friends and family that deep hackers from the Matrix underworld had stolen her identity and all of her money, and then she vanished. Hannah Kobayashi has now been missing for 14 days. This is a very bizarre, deeply unsettling missing persons case. It's very likely that Hannah has been abducted, being held against her will, and possibly has been sold into human trafficking. Hannah is an aspiring photographer from Hawaii. She had planned a trip to New York with her then boyfriend, but before the trip, her and her boyfriend broke up. They both still planned to go on this trip to New York. They just wouldn't be traveling together anymore. Despite this, Hannah still seemed very excited about her trip. She had multiple conversations about how excited she was. This was like a dream trip for Hannah. She made a bucket list and an itinerary of things she planned to do while she was in New York, which included a paid photography gig that she had booked, a concert, and also spending a lot of time with her aunt who lived in New York. On Friday, November 8th, Hannah boarded her flight from Hawaii to New York that had a layover in Los Angeles at the LAX airport. Hannah had about 40 minutes at LAX to make her connecting flight to New York. Her ex-boyfriend got on that plane, but Hannah did not. She missed her connecting flight. Hannah was put on standby waiting for the next flight to New York, but decided to leave the airport and go travel and explore LA. The next day, November 9th, Hannah was seen at the Grove, which is a shopping mall in LA. She spent a few hours in a bookstore where she charged her phone. The following day, November 10th, Hannah is seen back at the Grove. She's seen in the background of a video from a Nike LeBron James event. She also posts a photo on social media from this event. Now, this is where things get even weirder. On Monday, November 11th, which has now been 3 days since Hannah missed her flight to New York, she sent a string of strange and alarming text messages to her friends and family, where she says that she was hacked, her identity was stolen, she was tricked into giving away her money to someone that she thought she loved, and that it was some underworld Matrix shit. Hannah also says that she had an intense spiritual awakening. She would be heading back to the airport now because she was going to be getting on her flight to New York. Hannah also apologizes for all the craziness and also says was definitely intercepted, and I don't know what she means by that. Hannah's loved ones do not believe that Hannah sent these messages on her own free will, and potentially they weren't sent by Hannah at all. Words that she was using were not like Hannah, just the structure of the text were not like Hannah, and also when her family would call her, she wouldn't pick up the phone, she would only communicate with them through text messages. On that same day, Hannah's Venmo account sent 2 payments to 2 separate different people that her family do not recognize the names of, of. It is also unclear right now how much money Hannah's memo sent to these individuals. Shortly after this, Hannah returned to the LAX airport around 4 p.m. Her phone last pinged at the LAX airport. Her phone has not pinged since, and it has not been found. Another strange detail that I don't really see people talking about is that the amount of people that Hannah is following on Instagram has gone up and down in the past few days. The first time I checked, which was about 3 days ago, Hannah was following 2,488 accounts. It then went down to 2,487 and then back up to 2,488, and now it's down to 2,486, and I have no explanation on why this is happening because her phone has not been pinging. About 1 hour after Hannah's phone last pinged, she was spotted speaking to an employee at the LAX airport. Then about 4 hours later, Hannah boarded an LA Metro C-Line train that was near the airport. It has been confirmed that she was not alone. She was with an unknown individual. Her and this unknown person were then seen on surveillance footage departing at Metro Pico Station at 10 p.m. And this is the last confirmed sighting of Hannah. As of right now, the surveillance footage of Hannah leaving the train station with this unknown person has not been released to the public, but her family does say that they do not recognize the person that Hannah is traveling with, and also Hannah appears to be in a bad condition and does not appear to be safe. The following day, on November 12th, Hannah was reported missing by her family. Her entire family went to LA to search for Hannah, spread awareness about her disappearance, hand out missing persons posters. There has been a few sightings of Hannah, but as far as I can tell, none of them have been officially confirmed. Then tragically, just yesterday on November 24th, tragedy struck the Kobayashi family yet again. After searching for his daughter in LA for 13 days, Hannah's father, Ryan, was found dead in a parking lot in LA. The cause of death has not been released to the public, but it does appear that he unalived himself. There has been a lot of speculation online about why Hannah's father would unalive himself if his daughter is likely still alive and in danger. All I'm going to say is that the family wish that the focus stay on finding Hannah. So that's all I'm going to say about that for now. Hannah was last seen in a black hoodie with tie-dye leggings. It is believed that she's wearing glasses, carrying a moss green backpack. If you see Hannah, do not approach her, call 911, and if you can safely, try to get a photo of her, and also try to keep an eye on her if you can safely until the authorities arrive. Right now, it is not believed that Hannah is missing on her own free will. Her family says that this behavior is not like her. The main theory I see circulating online, especially due to Hannah's text messages, is that she met someone online. She thought she fell in love with them. She met this person in LA. This person was not who they said they were. She was tricked into sending this person or other people money. She was then potentially given substances against her will and then coerced into be taken somewhere else. And that's why in the security footage, it appears that she's in a bad condition and is not safe. And now she's probably being held against her will and possibly has been sold into human trafficking. I strongly urge you to keep researching this case. I'll try to keep you guys updated. Strongly urge you to share this video or share Hannah's missing persons poster as well, especially if you are from LA or California. Really interested to get your guys' thoughts on this case. Please leave me all of your opinions, your theories, your questions in the comment section. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video.
I try not to shame anyone's fetishes, but this guy had some dark and twisted fantasies. I mean, he didn't just fantasize about killing and eating someone. He actually did it. And what's so crazy is that he met his victim on a Yahoo cannibal chat group, and he was 100% willing and volunteered to be killed and consumed by this man. Not only that, but they literally tried eating his DICK, which they fried in wine, butter, and garlic. After he committed this act, he ate his corpse over the next 10 months, and he consumed about 44 pounds of his victim's flesh. This case sparked major controversy in Germany because he was sentenced to life in prison, but his victim volunteered to be killed. Some think that despite how gruesome this case is, he shouldn't be jailed for life for doing something that they both took pleasure in. But the more I researched this, the more disturbing details I found, so Let's talk about it. This is Armin Maiwes. He grew up in Germany and didn't have the best home life. He was pretty lonely as a kid, with his father abandoning him and his mom. For most of his young life, he lived on a remote farm and was taught at 6 years old how to slaughter his cattle. And he was even taught how to gut small animals like rabbits. He had an odd relationship with his mom, who was super controlling, and as Armin became an adult, she would often go on dates and business trips with him. But he thought this was normal because once he became a teenager, he and his mom moved into this huge estate in Rothenburg, which had 44 rooms. So he was pretty isolated with just her in this massive house. Armin said that he first knew something was wrong in his adolescent years when he created an imaginary friend named Frankie. He would often have some dark sexual and cannibal fantasies about Frankie, and he said that he could control these pretty well up until his mom died in 1999. Now an adult, his main focus and fantasies were about cannibalism, and he would often research other cannibals like Jeffrey Dahmer. Armin would also make these home fetish videos where he would cover himself in ketchup and pretend to cut himself. That, and he would hang himself up by his feet to resemble a slaughtered animal carcass. Once the internet started taking off in the 90s, Armin began getting on some online forums about cannibalism fetishes, and he would use the alias Frankie just like his imaginary friend. Most people dressed themselves up to look all cute for their profile pictures, but Armin would style himself as a butcher. He would often make posts about wanting to kill, dismember, and cannibalize another person, but he also fantasized about being cooked and eaten by someone else. Over the years, he would meet up with a few candidates/volunteers for his sick fantasies. One person under the username of Meat Boy. They would talk a lot on a Yahoo cannibal chat group, and Armin was so dead serious about his fantasies that he actually made a slaughter room in his house. On one occasion, Armin met up with Meat Boy at a hotel and slathered his body in olive oil, drawing circles on his body where he would eventually cut his meat from. But Meat Boy, along with the other potential volunteers, would all back out once they saw how serious Armin was, and his creepy slaughterhouse. In early 2000, Armin posted nearly 60 ads across various online forums, looking for a well-built 18 to 30-year-old who wanted to be slaughtered and consumed. But with this, Armin also made it very clear that this was all voluntary. He didn't want to force anyone to do anything that they didn't want to do. And if they even had a sliver of doubt, Armin would respect their wishes and back out of the plan. Like, this was his big thing, always remaining voluntary. On February 5th, 2001, Armin finally met a willing participant who responded to his ad, 43-year-old Bernd Brandes. Bernd was a really smart individual who was raised by a physician and an anesthesiologist. But like Armin, his mom had also died when he was pretty young, and after that, his dad remarried to a woman Bernd didn't like. It was in his teenage years that he became super distant and developed anxiety, and overall, Bernd just really didn't like who he was. He came out as an adult, which resulted in his family completely cutting him off, but he was really successful. He landed a job as an electrical engineer, made a ton of money, and by 2001, he had been dating a really nice guy for 2 years. It was when he saw Armin's ad online that this twisted fantasy really awakened in him. He would ask his partner to cut off his DICK, but he refused. So after this, Bernd started talking to Armin almost daily, and at first, he didn't want to be eaten, but ultimately he agreed just so Armin would castrate him. Meanwhile, Bernd's boyfriend had no idea what was going on. To him, there was no indication that Bernd had planned to die soon. They even bought new electronics together, and back at Armin's Rothenburg house, no one would have suspected his plans either. To his neighbors and coworkers, Armin was a really professional and friendly guy who would often help his neighbors mow their lawn. He was also known to host these really charming dinner parties, but on March 9th, 2001, this would all change. That evening, Armin met up with Bernd at the local train station, and at first, Armin thought the two should live together for at least a little while first before going through with their plan. But Bernd said no, he wanted to be slaughtered right away. So the two went back to Armin's house, and at midnight, they began. Massive trigger warning for this next part. Armin set up the video camera in the slaughterhouse and laid out 6 knives, a hatchet, and a meat grinder. As per Bernd's wishes, Armin tried biting off his DICK, but failed. And since this was obviously uncomfortable, he gave Bernd some cough syrup to ease the pain. Then Bernd started having second thoughts, so Armin gave him some sleeping pills, and he reportedly felt comfortable proceeding. Armin then cut off his DICK with a knife, and after wrapping up his wounds, he and Bernd attempted to eat it raw, but it was too chewy, so they couldn't. Instead, Armin fried it in a pan with some salt and pepper, some butter, garlic, and wine. But he accidentally burnt it past the point of eating it, so he chopped it up and fed it to his dog. dog. Bernd obviously lost a lot of blood, so at this point he was feeling a bit woozy, but he told Armin that if he somehow made it to the morning, that they could eat his BALLS together. Armin then ran him a bath and let him soak for a few hours while he relaxed and read a Star Trek book. He would check on him every 15 minutes. At this point, Bernd was fading in and out of consciousness, so when Armin took him back to the slaughterhouse, he collapsed due to his blood loss. Armin thought that he was dead, so he tied him to a table and cut off parts of his body. Like I said earlier, this entire thing was recorded by Armin, and it was later proven that when he started dismembering Bernd, he was actually still alive. He finally ended his life by stabbing him once in the throat. He continued dismembering him, and once that was done, he hung him up by a meat hook. This all took place within 8 hours of Bernd arriving at Armin's house. Over the next 10 months, Armin would eat his corpse little by little, storing pieces of him in his freezer under some pizza boxes. In total, he ate about 44 pounds of Bernd's flesh. He buried his bones all throughout his remote property, and he actually kept Bernd's head in the freezer for 6 entire months before burying that as well. Meanwhile, Bernd's boyfriend had reported him missing, but police were unable to track him down. After this, Armin went on to host 40 slaughter meetings with willing participants, but they would all get creeped out and cancel. This brings us to July 9th, 2002. This is when a 23-year-old man found one of Armin's ads online and asked him if he had ever actually killed someone before, to which Armin replied yes in great detail. This response shocked and disgusted the man, so he actually reported Armin to the police for a potential homicide. It took German authorities 2 months to track him down via his email and alias Frankie, but they eventually found him. When police searched his house, they found this strange meat in his freezer and the creepy slaughterhouse, but they didn't know the meat was human at first. Armin went with police voluntarily, and he did confess that his ads were real and all of his fetishes, but he wouldn't tell them what that strange meat actually was, so they ended up releasing him since they didn't have enough information to hold him at first. But the next day, Armin turned himself in, and when police went back to his house, they found Bernd's hands, feet, and head, but they also found so much more. They found 228 videotapes and 221 hard drives, which showed Armin killing, dismembering, and eating Bernd. I cannot even begin to imagine what it was like for them to watch this. Those tapes are so gruesome that they've never been released to the public. So needless to say, Armin was arrested for this, and he was quickly diagnosed with schizoid personality, although he was deemed fit to stand trial. At the trial, he described his actions as an assisted, and he even addressed Bernd's boyfriend and apologized, but he assured him that it was a beautiful death, one that Bernd had wished for a long time. Authorities acknowledged that Bernd's death wasn't forced, but they said that it still doesn't make it legal for him to do this. And then adding in the fact that his mental state was altered after taking sleeping pills, it really made everything look a lot worse for Armin. Armin was originally sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison after being found guilty of manslaughter, but in 2006, the court ordered a retrial. Prosecutors appealed his sentence and said that Armin should have been convicted of murder since he killed for sexual gratification, as shown in his home video. And then a psychologist who evaluated Armin came forward and said that he could kill again, and that he still had fantasies about devouring the flesh of young men. This time, Armin was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Since 2020, he's been allowed to go out into the public on supervised trips wearing a disguise, which is crazy. And after his arrest, the house where this all happened became kind of like a tourist destination. What's insane is that while his trial was taking place, a local investor tried to buy Armin's property and turn it into a themed hotel called Cannibal World. He would offer shuttle services, photo shoots, and even a cannibal cafe. But Armin and the people in the Rotenburg community refused, so this didn't happen. In 2023, his house was burned down due to an arson attack, so it essentially just doesn't exist anymore. And the last thing that I will leave you guys with is that Armin is now a vegetarian. I don't know, what do you guys think about this? Some people think that he shouldn't be in jail for life because Bernd volunteered to be killed and consumed, but I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss for words here. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.
He told a friend, "I'm going to be murdered," and just days later, his badly beaten body was discovered over 2,000 miles away from home. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Blair Adams. Robert Dennis Blair Adams, who just went by Blair, was born in December 1964. He lived in the absolutely stunning Surrey, British Columbia in Canada. Blair was described as a generally very well-liked man. He worked for a construction company where he was very dedicated to his job, and his colleagues would all say that he was someone that they could rely on. He had a close bond with his family, he had a lovely group of friends, and he didn't have trouble with women either. At the time time of this case, Blair was in a very good place in his life. In his younger years, he did get in a spot of bother, being convicted of a couple of charges, including assault and drug charges, but at the time of this case, he had completely moved on from that. He was on the up and up, staying out of bother. He no longer used drugs, he didn't drink alcohol, he was actually 2 years sober. Life was good for Blair, and so when he began drastically changing, the alarm bells were blaring. In the shortest amount of time, Blair had become moody, erratic, and paranoid. He had uncontrollable and unpredictable mood swings. He wasn't sleeping, he was barely eating, he seemed unbothered about his job, he would leave some of the sites open, and when his mum asked him what is going on, he said that he couldn't tell her. Now, everything I'm about to explain happened over the course of just a couple of days. So on the 5th of July 1996, Blair turned up at his bank withdrawing every single penny that he had, which was around about $6,000. He also emptied his safety deposit box, which contained expensive jewellery, gold and platinum coins, and so much more. He then jumped into his car and tried to drive over the US border. However, he was knocked back at Border Patrol. He was a young man travelling with wads of cash, couldn't explain where he was going, and he had previous drug convictions. He fit the profile for a drug smuggler perfectly, and he was not allowed into the US. After this, he would go to his job at the construction site and told his boss that he was leaving. He was quitting with immediate effect, and he never returned to pick up his last pay slip. He would then go home and booked a return flight to Germany. However, just hours later, in the middle of the night, he would show up at his friend's house in a terrified and panicked state. He was begging this friend to please take him to the border, but for whatever reason, this friend couldn't. Blair then started pleading with this friend and explained to them that he thought someone was trying to kill him, that they were hunting him down. By the 9th, Blair Adams had managed to pass over the Canada-US border and made his way to Seattle, Washington. Once here, he would buy a one-way flight to DC, which cost him around about $700. And now I am just jumping ahead a little bit here, but later down the line, this is something that really confused the investigators, because actually buying a return ticket would have cost him half the price. So why didn't he do that? Was he intending to not return? Blair would eventually make his way to Knoxville, Tennessee, a place that he had never been, a place where he didn't know anyone and had no reason for being there. He hired a Toyota rental car, and at one point he pulled over at a garage because he was having some difficulty with the car. A man came over and tried to help him, and Blair told him, "I cannot get this car to start." He was described as acting strangely, and when he handed this man over a car key, it was for a Nissan car, not a Toyota. So obviously it wasn't going to work, it wasn't the right car key. However, Blair insisted that he didn't have another one. Sources conflict on what happened here. Some say that he emptied his pockets and he genuinely didn't have another car key, and others say that he refused to look in his pockets. So now Blair was stuck. He was stranded in Knoxville and couldn't continue going on the move like he had done constantly over the past couple of days. Witnesses who recalled seeing him said that he looked nervous, irritated, and paranoid. He would be taken to a nearby hotel and he paced, walking back and forth in and out of the reception area for around about an hour before eventually paying around about $100 to check into a room. However, he would never get the chance to step foot into it. He left the reception area at around about 7:30 p.m. and 12 hours later, his body would be discovered. On the 11th of July 1966, police received a concerned phone call from a group of men who thought they had just came across a homeless person sleeping in the middle of the street. When the police arrived, however, they would soon realise that this wasn't someone sleeping on the ground. This was the deceased body of a man. 31-year-old Blair Adams had been discovered half naked and badly beaten. His trousers and socks had both been removed and they had been taken off in a way that indicated that someone else had taken them off, not that Blair had pulled them down. Both of his shoes were also removed, however one was tucked underneath his head, almost as if he had been using it for a pillow. Surrounding his body, officers discovered hundreds of dollars in several different currencies, including Canadian dollars, American dollars, and a German currency. His bum bag was also found nearby, which contained the gold and platinum coins, but also gold bars. The jewellery that he had taken out of his safety deposit box was also discovered, and so this really helped the investigators to exclude that this was a robbery motivated crime. Eerily, around about 10 feet away from Blair's body was the key for the Toyota car. Where had it been this entire time? Blair's autopsy would show that he had died after sustaining a violent blow which ruptured his stomach. He had scratches and abrasions which were consistent with self-defense wounds, and he also had a prominent wound to his forehead. Despite the sheer brutality of Blair's murder, the only scrap of evidence that was left behind for the investigators was a single strand of hair, which led them absolutely nowhere. The investigators tried to look down every single avenue that they could. They followed every single tip that they were given, but all of them led them to nothing. They simply got stuck. They could not figure out a motive. Was this an accident? A crime of opportunity? Was someone genuinely trying to hunt Blair down and followed him over 2,000 miles away from his home to brutally murder him? Or did Blair experience a mental breakdown and simply got in front of the wrong person? That final one is more believable to the investigators, as it would sort of explain some of his erratic behaviour and questionable decisions in the days leading up to his death. 29 years later, this case is still unsolved. Comment down below and let me know what you think happened.
I've heard a lot of people say that the Netflix documentary left out some details that they think are important, so let's just talk about the entire thing. We're talking about Mackenzie Shirilla. I have covered this case before, but it's been a while. Around 5:40 a.m. on July 31st, 2022, a horrible car crash took place in Strongsville, Ohio. It was in the early hours of a Sunday morning, meaning that not a lot of people were out and about and no one was there to call emergency services right away when the crash took place. It wouldn't be until after the car had run through the lawn, hit a sign, crashed into a brick building, and practically split in two that a witness would see the aftermath 45 minutes later and call it in. Inside the car were three people. 19-year-old Davian Flanagan was in the back seat, 20-year-old Dominic Russo was in the passenger seat, and 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla was the driver. Every single one of them was trapped inside, all of them unconscious. Davian, who was sitting in the back, had been thrown from the force of the crash, and he was found on Dominique's lap. Despite their best efforts, neither of them were able to be saved, and they were both pronounced deceased at the scene. It's believed that they passed away on impact. Mackenzie Shirilla had to be cut out of the car. She was found trapped underneath the dashboard. She had critical injuries, including a broken leg and broken ribs, and was light flighted to the hospital immediately, where she would go on to receive extensive care. As horrible as the car crash was, she did survive, and she would eventually recover from her injuries. At the scene, on an officer's body cam, you can hear him say, "Rest in peace, buddy," and then he says, quote, "This is just going to be a nightmare of a day for this whole department," end quote. The night prior, that friend group had all been together, and the plan of them was to have a sleepover. Yet for reasons we may never know, Mackenzie and Dom, after having been asleep, woke back up around 5 in the morning and decided to drive home. Those two were a couple. They had been dating for a few years, and Davion was a close friend of theirs. Davion had spoken to another friend who offered to drive him home, but he decided to get inside of that car because he just wanted to go home to go get some sleep. Obviously, he never made it back home. The reactions of the parents when they were informed were devastating. Davion was the oldest brother to his two little sisters. All three of them had been adopted by their parents. They called Davion's dad at work to let him know, and very quickly that entire family's world was turned upside down. Don's sister and Don's dad were completely in shock, and one of their immediate thoughts was concern for Mackenzie and hoping that she would make it. Mackenzie's parents drove and got to the hospital as soon as they could, and given that she was the only survivor, authorities wanted to speak to her when she was stable enough to see if they could get a statement from her. But when they got to the hospital, they were a little bit taken aback about how hesitant the Shirilla family was to speak to them. And there's something called Pig Latin, okay? The definition is, quote, "Pig Latin is a playful language game used to conceal words or talk secretly," end quote. So it's like a made-up language where you move the first consonant of a word to the end and add AY to the end of it. So for example, pig becomes igpay and Latin becomes at and lay. I guess it's a common thing for adults to use around their kids so that the kids do not understand what they're saying. Well, at the hospital, when they're informed that this is now going to be an investigation they have to look into, Mackenzie Shirilla is talking to her mom in this language or a very similar one. And in whatever language, you can hear her tell her mom, quote, "Can we tell the police I had a seizure? Can we tell the police?" something like that. Then she asks the officers if they could just take away her license for 10 years or something like that. So she is showing concern, but only for herself, right? So it kind of comes off as odd given that one of the victims was her close friend and the other one was allegedly the love of her life. The news of the crash spread quickly throughout Strongsville, and it seemed like people either thought one of two things: that this was a tragic, terrible accident, or that this was planned and done on purpose with the intent to murder. So like I said, Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo were a couple that was known to be constantly on and off. If you asked Mackenzie's parents what their relationship was like, they would tell you that they were in love, that they were soulmates, and that they probably would have gotten married. However, if you asked Dom's mom, who did know Mackenzie
very, very well because they had spent a lot of time together, she would tell you that their relationship was toxic and unhealthy. And some, not all, but definitely some friends would agree with that as well. It was a common thing for Mackenzie and Dom to be constantly arguing. And Mackenzie is the type of girl that thinks it's my way or the highway. She has said that in her own words before. She was also extremely possessive over Dom and more oftentimes than not very controlling and very jealous. She was the type of girlfriend that would be like, oh, you want to break up with me? Well, that's too bad because I call the shots and I say that we are going to be together forever or else. Relationship aside, classmates have described her to be selfish and to carry around an ego that showed that she didn't really seem to care about anyone else but herself. The descriptions that multiple people have given make her sound reckless, self-centered, and insensitive. And some classmates have even said that they were not surprised about the crash at all because it sounded like something that Mackenzie Shirella would do out of anger. This is a quote from Dom's older sister, quote, from what I heard from his buddies and people that were close in their age, not that they saw the crash coming, but it wasn't a surprise for a lot of people based off her behavior and how she was, end quote. Mackenzie was also known to use substances daily and drive her car while doing so, which is extremely reckless yet important because it shows that she is more than capable of driving her car in that state, even though you shouldn't, but given that she pretty much did it every single day. So, there were three possibilities. One, that maybe the night of the crash she had consumed a stronger substance that was found in her car that made her lose control and she did black out and she did crash on accident. Yet, when the test results came back, there was nothing significant found in her system. The second option, two, that it was an accident as a result of POTS. POTS is a blood pressure disorder that Mackenzie had that can cause sudden dizziness, lightheadedness, and blackouts. But the question there is, if POTS was a real big safety concern, why would Mackenzie be allowed to drive at all? It was her mom that was arguing the most about this being the case, really making her concern for POTS known. Yet Mackenzie Shirella was 17 years old. She had had her license for a while, but she was not an adult. And when she got her license, her nor her parents ever mentioned POTS at the DMV. Her mom signed off on allowing her daughter to have a license to be able to drive wherever, drive on the highway, because there was no real concern about her experiencing dizziness. To then argue that this is what happened when two people are gone, it feels convenient. Leaving the third option to be that Mackenzie got in a fight with her boyfriend, threatened him, and crashed into that building on purpose to end it all, without considering the consequences, without considering the many people that she would hurt, and without even giving a second thought to a person that she described to be her friend sitting in the back seat, Davion Flanagan. So as investigators start learning more about this couple and about what the dynamic of the relationship was, mixed with evidence from the crime scene along with CCTV footage that would later be revealed in court, things started to look pretty bad for Mackenzie. And officers had reason to believe that she could have been responsible for causing this tragedy on purpose, that purpose being death. And it didn't help her case when a friend of Dominic Russo spoke to authorities and told them about something that had happened previously. That friend had been on the phone with Dom during a fight with Mackenzie when he heard her say, quote, "I will crash this car right now," end quote. This wasn't the night of. This was a previous night, a previous incident when she did not go through with it, but she did mention that she would and that she could. Dominic's mother, Christine, had also been contacted by her son weeks before the crash, specifically because he was scared, because they were arguing again and Mackenzie was driving erratically on the freeway with Dominic in the car. That time he called his mom asking for help, but Mackenzie would claim that it was actually Dominic who would grab the steering wheel and try to crash the car, not her. We also know that at a different time, Mackenzie had threatened to key Dominic's car and to break off a handle off of a door after he refused to let her come inside. Into his house, by the way. All of this was evidence that authorities were gathering to say that this was part of a pattern of escalating controlling behavior in the weeks leading up to July 31st of 2022, and they believed that it formed an argument that the crash was not as a result of an accident, but instead the culmination of that pattern. But what really confirmed the suspicions they already had were the results of the tests that they received in regards to the car itself and the CCTV footage they were able to get their hands on. Because the only other option left, apart from the ones that I already mentioned, would have been that the car itself malfunctioned. Yet, when the car was taken apart piece by experts, it was confirmed that every single thing in that car was working as it should have been, and this was not a result of any sort of mechanical error. There was nothing wrong with the car. But what the car data did show was that only seconds before the impact, Mackenzie inexplicably sped up and made a hard steering turn to the right directly into that brick building. She had been driving 25 miles an hour, and then in the span of 20 to 25 seconds, she sped up to 100 miles an hour. Data from the car confirmed that her right foot was pressed down on the accelerator to its full extent, pushing the car over 100 miles per hour, and that the brake pedal was never applied at any point before impact. Mackenzie's foot never never touched the brake pedal. In those 20 to 25 seconds it took for her to speed up, her foot stayed solely on the accelerator the entire time. She had time to decide to slow down, but she did the opposite. And to go back to her diagnosis of POTS, if this had been accidental, if she blacked out and lost control of the car, authorities felt that that would have been shown in the way that she was driving. Yet on CCTV footage, before the car gets onto the road that it would speed down, Mackenzie is seen driving completely normal. Driving the speed limit, like I mentioned, 25 miles per hour, putting her blinker onto turn, turning carefully and normally, clearly in control of the car. Then 58 to 59 seconds later, she speeds up and does not try to stop. Authorities also uncovered GPS data that showed that Mackenzie had driven that exact route of the crash days before the incident multiple times, the route which was one that she did not usually take, which prosecutors cited as premeditation. This was calculated. It was not a road that she had any reason to be on. The fact that she had driven it beforehand suggested to the prosecution that she had scouted the location in advance. They also believe that she planned it to do it 2 days before her 18th birthday so that she could not be tried as an adult. So, combined with the prior threats, the prior route, the sharp right turn of the steering wheel, and the full acceleration, prosecutors argued that this was no medical episode. It was not an accident. It was not a moment of recklessness, and they were now confident that these were planned murders. On November 4th, Mackenzie Shirley was arrested on multiple charges, including aggravated murder and aggravated vehicular homicide. And I saw someone say that during her arrest, specifically in the clips shown in that Netflix documentary, Mackenzie's only concern is not being able to wear her bracelets and keep them on while in custody, and her friend in the documentary argued that she wanted to keep those bracelets because Dom gave her the bracelets and they were the last things that she had from him. But in that same documentary, there are clips shown of how Dom showered Mackenzie with gifts. He would give her clothing and other items very often, which I doubt she threw away. So her friend's argument to me just kind of sounds a little bit irrelevant. And up until that point of her arrest, she had been in communication with Dom's family a lot. Dom's dad and sister had gone out of their way to spend time with Mackenzie, trying to help her as much as they could as she navigated the grief and the losing of her alleged love of her life and her friend. And in a text exchange between her and Dom's mother, Mackenzie wrote that she did not do anything on purpose. Christine says, quote, "What is the last thing that you remember?" To which she responds with, quote, "I remember turning on the street and then my vision fades to black. It really pains me not being able to remember anything. I promise I would tell you," unquote. Davion's family as well wanted to believe that this was an accident, yet everything changed after her arrest. She would remain in custody up until her trial, and despite her being 17 years old the day of and turning 18 2 days later, the court made the decision that she would be tried as an adult. Mackenzie's trial began August 7th of 2023. Now let's talk about evidence that was presented. But real quick, in the courtroom, she's shown wearing some sort of arm cast, right? There was no medical reason as to why she would have been needing to wear that. She was fine. She was just wearing it because she wanted to, I guess. I don't know. You decide. Anyway, first of all, CCTV footage of the crash was shown and it left the entire courtroom emotional. Davion's mom was sitting there and she watched it for the first time. She had to run to the bathroom because she got sick. She couldn't watch it. There were autopsy photos shown of both Davion and Dom, and during that, Dom's mom had to run out of the courtroom. Experts came up and testified about the gas pedal on the car, saying that it was pushed to its full acceleration capacity, pushed all the way down as far as it could go without any attempts to ever hit the brake. Also making sure to mention that 1 second before the crash, Mackenzie did a hard right turn on the wheel and into the brick building. There was evidence presented of Mackenzie's selfish and violent behavior, including a recording that Dom took of one of their arguments, where Mackenzie is heard threatening his property and calling him horrible names. And then there's social media evidence. So following the accident, Mackenzie made it known on social media that she was grieving. She posted videos of her and Dominic saying things such as, quote, "I miss you, Nug. I still feel like you're just going to walk in the door any second. I miss your laugh, your perfect smile. God, you are the last person to deserve this. You had such a perfect life ahead of you. I wish I told you all this more. Please wait for me," end quote. And initially, a lot of people did feel bad for her until it almost seemed as if she was over it. She was grieving and heartbroken for about 5 minutes, and then she seemed to be completely fine. In the courtroom, there were screenshots shown of her activity on social media, screenshots of events that happened shortly after Mackenzie was released from the hospital after spending weeks there recovering, but obviously from before she was formally charged. Between that time period on social media, she and her mother were responding to a modeling agency in the comments of an Instagram post trying to work with them. Mackenzie was posting pictures of her friends out celebrating Halloween, dressing up as a corpse for Halloween, driving a car, and even attending a concert. And if you want my personal opinion, those are not signs of a person who is grieving and mourning, who just lost her boyfriend and good friend. Mackenzie's mother made a statement in the court. Don't even get me started. In my opinion, she made it so much worse for her daughter. Her mom went up there to talk about Mackenzie, trying to shut down any rumors or beliefs that she didn't care and that she wasn't mourning, which I get, right? I guess as a mother, you want to protect your daughter, but the lack of sympathy is actually insane, to the point that the judge interrupted her and said, quote, "I'm hearing an awful lot about your daughter. I'm not hearing very much about the two deceased people," end quote. The mom said, "I'm asking you for leniency because this was a tragic accident she does not remember. And Don, Davion, he's a new friend and I'm so sorry." And the judge was like, "A new friend? What does that mean? His life is worthless?" It was bad. Mackenzie would have been better off if she just told her mom to sit down, honestly. At her sentencing, the judge said, quote, "There's only one person who's responsible for the pain of everyone in this room. That person is you, Mackenzie. Nobody else is responsible. This isn't the fault of Dominic's family or Davion's family or your family." Mackenzie was found guilty and she was sentenced to 2 sentences of 15 years to life to be served concurrently. She will be 34 years old by the time that she's eligible for parole for the first time. Also, following the release of The Crash on Netflix, the Netflix documentary on May 15th, Steve Sharilla, Mackenzie's father, was placed on administrative leave from his job. He works for a school in Cleveland and was placed on leave after the school received comments and allegations about his conduct and moral position as seen in the documentary. The school issued a statement saying, quote, "We are investigating allegations made on social media that one of our teachers has demonstrated poor judgment. Upon learning of the allegation, the school acted immediately and placed that teacher on administrative leave," end quote. That's all. Let me know your thoughts on this. I am very curious to know all of your opinions, so I will be in the comment section. Thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This man breaks into a house and kidnaps a 4-year-old boy right out of his own bed. His name is Darian Brown. He's 18, living in Dallas, Texas, and this is not some harmless kid doing some dumb mistake. The whole neighborhood says he's a little odd, unpredictable, and sometimes aggressive for no reason at all. On February 8th, 2021, for some unknown reason, he decides to walk straight into some random house like he owns the place. No knocking, no, "Hey, how's it going?" Nothing. He just wanders through the room like he's looking for something. He ends up in the kitchen and grabs a knife. And that's when the homeowner sees him. It's this really sweet grandpa just spending the day with his 2-year-old granddaughter. And now there's a stranger in the kitchen holding a knife. Somehow, grandpa stays calm. He tells him to leave and manages to push him out the door. Crisis averted, right? No, because just minutes later, Darian kicks down the garage door until it pops open. He storms into the house, starts punching grandpa in the head, and runs to the living room where this little girl is sitting on the couch. Darian grabs the girl and starts walking towards the front door. She's crying and screaming for grandpa to come and save her, and even though grandpa is in pain from all the punches he took earlier, he is still yelling and demanding for Darian to let her go. But Darian doesn't stop. He keeps walking straight towards the door, and in that moment, grandpa's flight or fight kicks in. He lunges forward, grabs his granddaughter, and now they're pulling her back and forth in this nightmare of tug of war. But eventually, grandpa overpowers Darian and yanks her free. But in that exact moment, Darian punches grandpa in the face again and just bolts out the front door. But here's the craziest part. Just 2 weeks later, Darian and the grandpa run into each other at Walmart. Awkward. And Darian is like, "Hey, my bad for, breaking in and trying to take your granddaughter." I'm not joking. Like, that's word for word what he said. But I guess Darian didn't really mean that apology, because just 3 months later, he tries again. He finds a different house where a woman named Monica was living with her own kids. But in that house was also 4-year-old twin brothers, Cash and Carter, who were not her kids. Long story short, Monica was dating their dad, and at some point, he just up and leaves them, dumping his 4-year-old twin boys on her to take care of. And while everyone is sleeping, Darian breaks into their house and sneaks into the bedroom where 4-year-old Carter and Cash were sleeping on the same bed. He walks right up to the bed. He slides his arm under Cash and slowly lifts him up from under the blanket without waking Carter. Then he turns and walks right out of the room with Cash in his arms. And what he does next, I can't even explain the reason for it. He carries Cash about 8 blocks away. He pulls out a knife and he attacks him over and over and over again until Cash is no longer alive. But Darian, he's not done. He heads straight back to the house to try and kidnap the other brother. The baby monitor catches him walking right back up to that bed. He's just standing there, just looking down at Carter, and for reasons we will never understand, he turns around and walks right out of the room without taking him. That's terrifying. I mean, it's scary and it's so sad because just minutes later, Carter wakes up and he's in a panic because his brother's gone. And then what breaks my heart is that around 6:40 in the morning, a woman is out on her morning walk and she sees something out in the street. At first, she thinks it's a dog, but as she gets closer and closer, she sees little tiny arms and legs. Sadly, it was Cash. And I can only imagine how traumatizing that must have been to see that and find him there. Later that same night, Darian is arrested after they matched him to the baby monitor footage and the neighborhood surveillance videos. And when they searched his home, they found the hoodie and sneakers that he was wearing that morning, both stained with Cash's blood. This case happened in 2021, and as of right now, Darian still hasn't been found guilty. Apparently, his mental health issues keep stalling the trial. Please be safe out there. I love you guys. Mwah. Group hug.
This child watched her dad stab her mum to death and then was forced to move back in with him. Before we get into today's case, if you guys do want deep dives, I do post a brand new episode on my podcast, The Born Investigation, every single week. It was September 1992 in Manchester. Carol Quintin was just 26 years old. She had a husband called Jeffrey, and the pair had an adorable 3-year-old little girl together called Gemma. Now, Carol was an absolutely amazing mum. She loved her little girl. But she was going through a really difficult time. She just wasn't happy in her marriage anymore, and she'd actually met somebody new. She felt like things just hadn't been right within her marriage for a long time, and she kind of wanted a fresh start, but didn't really know how to broach the subject. She knew she needed to tell her husband that she wanted a divorce. She wasn't expecting all hell to break loose. Now, from what we can gather, there was some kind of argument, some kind of discussion about the relationship. Carol wanted to leave, and little Gemma was downstairs eating her breakfast and watching TV. All of a sudden, her dad stormed downstairs and went into the kitchen cupboards. He grabbed a huge pair of tailoring scissors and then stormed back up the stairs. Now, Gemma was totally confused. Being only a tiny little girl herself, she didn't really understand the gravity of the situation. She scurried after her dad and then was stopped dead in her tracks. Jeffrey plunged the scissors into Carol's heart 11 times, over and over and over again. Blood just started spraying absolutely everywhere, and little Gemma couldn't believe what she was seeing. The little 3-year-old just stood there frozen in terror. There was absolutely no hope for Carol, bless her. She'd been stabbed 36 times in total. And seeing her stabbed to death is Gemma's only memory of her mum. Her dad then scooped her up and took her to the police station to hand himself in. He claimed that he had no memory of the attack. He said that he only remembered having a big argument with her. He said that he found love bites on her neck. For some insane reason, at the murder trial, the jury found him not guilty of murder, but they did find him guilty of manslaughter, wild, and he was only given, wait for it, 4 years in prison for brutally killing the mother of his little girl in front of the toddler. And I'm not done. Honestly, this case made my blood absolutely boil. He only served half of a 4-year sentence in prison, and he was then just released to carry on living his life. Gemma, bless her, had been trying to live a normal childhood after this absolute trauma, living with her grandparents while he was in prison. But horrifically, as soon as he was released from jail, they made her move back in with him. She was just 6 years old at this point. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? To not only see the man that killed your mum in front of you, but actually to live with him. Absolutely insane. She had to push all of those horrible memories, all of that trauma down, and just try and get on with her life. She suffered horrifically with PTSD following on from that. And it was actually only once she grew a lot older and moved away, had some time away from her dad, that she really understood what she'd actually been through. And at that point, thankfully, she decided, you know what, I actually need to cut this awful man out of my life. She now wants change. She said it's almost always the case case that the killer gets treated better than the child who's lost a parent. The prison tends to their needs, mental health support is readily accessible, but for the children, we are left with nothing, very often invisible and unaccounted for as a bereaved child. She's now campaigning for legislation that is shocking that it's not already in place. It would suspend parental responsibility after a parent is sentenced for killing the other parent. I feel like that should be common sense, right?
In 1997, the body of a newborn infant would be found after someone had flushed the baby's body down a toilet. This case would sadly go unsolved for over 25 years until this TikToker did an ancestry DNA kit.
Get ready with me while I tell you about how an ancestry DNA kit is putting my grandma in prison.
I've tagged the original creator, Jenna, down below. Highly suggest you go watch her video, her story in her own words. But you guys haven't sent me or tagged me in one video as much as you have with this story. And the original creator did say she wants more people to talk about it and bring awareness to the story. It was June 26, 1997 at Garnett Lake Campground. On the campground, there was an outhouse that needed to be cleaned. The septic tank was going to be cleaned by an employee using like a suction hose, and while they were cleaning it, they realized that something had been flushed down the toilet that was clogging the hose. Further inspection found out that whatever had been flushed down the toilet that was clogging the hose was the body of a newborn baby. An autopsy could not determine the cause of death or even if the baby had been born alive, but the investigation was being handled as a homicide. An autopsy could determine that the baby was a little baby girl. She had been born full term or close to full term. But unfortunately, in 1997, DNA testing was not what we have today, and there were no witnesses and no leads. The community of Garnett came together to bury the little baby girl in a proper, respectful burial under the name Baby Girl Garnett. This would be a very well-known unsolved mystery in this location, but it would sadly go unsolved for over 25 years. In 2017, the Baby Garnett case would be reopened with a special interest in genetic genealogy now that we had more advancements in DNA testing. And this is really, really interesting because like every single cold case that I've researched in the past 5 years seems to have been solved with genetic genealogy. And in 2022, the biological niece of Baby Garnett did one of those ancestry DNA kits, you know, like those 23andMe's. It's really interesting if you go and watch her video. She says that everyone in her hometown always knew about this case. She lived her entire life never knowing that her biological grandmother was the mother of Baby Garnett. And once you do one of those DNA tests, the police have access to all of that DNA, which led to the arrest of the now 60-year-old Nancy Grotowski, the biological mother of Baby Garnett. She has been charged with murder and involuntary manslaughter and the concealment of someone's death. This case is still ongoing. It's still going through trial, so we don't have a lot of updates right now. We don't know a lot right now. What we do know is the prosecution's theory. They believe that when Nancy was in her 30s, she became pregnant. She gave birth in her home. The baby had passed away from asphyxiation, whether that was caused by Nancy or just, happened medically on accident, we do not know. But they do believe that this baby's death could have been prevented with some kind of medical intervention if Nancy had called the police, but she did not call 911. Instead, she drove 20 miles to Garnett Lake Campground and flushed her daughter down the toilet to conceal her body and her death. Like I said, this case is still ongoing. There's so much more that's going to come out as this case and trial progress. I know they have a hearing sometime next month, December 2024. Highly suggest if you guys want more updates as this progresses to go follow Jenna. It was her family. It was her DNA test. Go follow her for updates. Give her and her family some support. You guys are truly the best audience, and I've really seen you guys come forward for families in the past. We've done GoFundMes, we've done petitions. Go show Jenna some support in my comment section as my community. Go leave her some nice supportive comments because I know she's getting some really nasty ones right now as well. That's all I have for updates right now. If you guys watched the end of this video, thank you so much. Leave me all your opinions, your theories, your thoughts, and your questions in the comment section. I'll try to answer as much as I can. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Until then, love you guys so much. See you guys tomorrow with another video.
This is the story of Daryl and Christian Deadman. 47-year-old James Anderson was born on June 30th, 1963 in Holmes County, Mississippi. He had later moved to Jackson, Mississippi. He was in a 17-year relationship with a man named James Bradfield. The two adopted a son together. They were heavy in the church. James Anderson worked at the Nissan plant for almost 10 years. He seemed like a normal, nice guy from what I read. So, what happened to him shocked me. On June 26, 2011, 18-year-old Daryl Dietman and his friends were drinking and partying in a small town of Puckett in Rankin County, Mississippi. When the group ran out of alcohol, they wanted some more, and Daryl had the idea of going to a late night store, but in a predominantly black area. Daryl told his friends, let's go fuck with some N-words. And the group split up. Some got in Daryl's green Ford pickup truck, and the other group got into a white Jeep Cherokee. The group drove 16 miles to the western edge of Jackson. This is where they seen 47-year-old James Anderson. The group in the white Jeep Cherokee spotted James first, and they contacted Daryl saying that they found somebody. When they rolled up on James, he was standing next to his truck. They said that he was breaking into a truck, but that was indeed James's truck. He had just lost his keys. So the group pretended to help him get in his truck. And when his back was turned, they started beating him. The motel camera footage didn't catch the actual beating, just bodies moving in and out of the frame. But they robbed James, and as they was beating him, they was yelling out racial slurs. A witness even heard them yell out white power. But the Jeep Cherokee, after the beating, they fled the scene and hurried and left the parking lot. But Daryl, as James was staggering off, trying to get help, he got into his green Ford pickup truck and ran James over. Someone from the hotel immediately called 911 after this attack, but Daryl and his friends went to eat. Afterwards, they went to a diner, and Daryl was repeatedly saying, I ran that N-word over. Daryl and all his friends were arrested that morning due to his truck being on camera, and it was several eyewitnesses, and it was like 10 of them arrested. These two were just in the truck with Daryl, but this is something that they did often. They would just fuck with black people. The police were very familiar with this group. They called them racist thugs. Daryl was charged with capital murder and hate crime. These two were charged with hate crime leading to murder. They had bonded out, these two, on a 5K bond. Everybody pled guilty, and the trial started in February of 2015. Daryl was sentenced to 50 years to life. James Anderson's family did not want to give him the death penalty. They was against it due to their religious beliefs. John Rice was sentenced to 18 years, and Dalen Butler was sentenced to 7 years. Daryl had apologized to James' family and was seeming remorseful, but fuck him. As I was reading about how much of an uproar this case had caused, the protest, the LGBTQ community, because he was also gay, the lawsuits, James' partner couldn't even get no money for no wrongful death suit because he was gay. It was just all type of crazy shit I was reading, and then I came across the name Christian Deadman. This is Daryl's first cousin, who's a deputy in Rankin County, Mississippi. Now let's talk about what he did. Christian was part of a group called the Goon Squad, which is something that the 6 officers called themselves. On January 24th, 2023, one of the officers got a call from a woman saying that it was 2 black men next door at her white neighbor's house, and she thought that that was suspicious. Those 2 men were Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, and they were over Christy Wiley's house, who was Eddie Parker's childhood friend. Christy had become paralyzed at the age of 15, and Eddie was there to help her whenever she needed it. Christy was in the hospital at this time, and Eddie was tending to her home like she had asked him to do, when these 6 officers bust the door down without a warrant or anything. And before trying to restrain Eddie and Michael, they started calling them all type of racial slurs, telling them to go back to Jackson. The officers then repeatedly beat and tased the men, One of the officers found a dildo in the home and forced it down Eddie's throat, then attempted to do the same to Michael. Christian told the men that he was going to rape him. He actually got behind Michael about to pull his pants down, and he seen that Michael had soiled himself, so he changed his mind. The officers then held the man down while Christian poured alcohol, chocolate syrup, cooking oil, and milk on them. All of the officers threw eggs on Michael and Eddie. They beat them with a wood plank and a sword. Christian fired several shots if the men would get out of order. They then forced them to take a shower to wash away the evidence. One of the officers tried to empty the bullets out of his gun. Well, he thought he did. And then he put his gun inside of Michael's mouth, trying to scare him into not saying nothing. And he pulled the trigger and the gun clicked. He pulled the trigger again and his gun went off. The bullet lacerated Michael's tongue and shattered his neck and jaw. The police panicked at this point and they went outside to concoct some type of plan. The officers planted a gun and drugs in the home. They also said that Michael tried to shoot them. They took the hard drives from the cameras and threw it in the river. Eddie got arrested but bonded out the next day. Michael was in the hospital literally fighting for his life, but the two had all of these false charges on them. Of course, this caused an uproar in Mississippi. It was a lot of protesting going on for Michael and Eddie. Michael's gunshot wound became key evidence. Even though they said that he tried to shoot them, the medical examiner said their gun had to be in his mouth for him to get this type of a wound. After a very long and drawn out investigation, finally in June of 2023, one of the officers cracked under pressure and told everything in the interrogation room. Who was the ringleader? Christian Deadman. It came out that the group would talk on WhatsApp. They had a chat thread on there dating back years with all type of incriminating shit, and they was only targeting Black men. All the officers pled guilty and they were sentenced in April of 2024. And here is all their names and the time that they got. Interesting last name, Deadman. When I was reading about Christian, it was a lot of sexually assaulting men with flashlights, pool sticks, broomsticks. Be yourself. I know you yourself in there. I know they having that. You somebody's whole girlfriend in there. I know you are. Both of y'all, actually. I know they done made y'all touch every wall in there. I know them Black men. I know they had a good time when y'all touched down. But Christian, when you get out, baby, that wrist is broke when you get out. Cause boy, you're gay. You gay. Sending love to the victims of these two. Michael and Eddie charges were dropped. They got a $2.5 million settlement. Do I think that's enough? Absolutely not. But I'ma mind my business. Fuck these two.
What would you do if your baby was trapped underground, close enough to hear her cries but impossible to reach? It was the 14th of October, which is actually my birthday, in 1987, not my birthday, in Midland, Texas. Little Jessica McClure was only 18 months old, such a gorgeous, cute baby girl. She was actually staying at her auntie's house for the day. Her auntie was called Jamie, and Jamie ran a daycare center for kids. This was obviously extremely handy for the extended family. Now, Jessica's mum, Reba, was only a kid herself. Honestly, she was 17. She was like 16 when she had this little baby. But she'd got this arrangement with her sister where she helped out at the daycare so that she could A, earn some extra money, and B, look after her child. So it was a win-win. But on that particular day, they were all hanging out in the garden. Reba and 5 little children, all just hanging out enjoying the sun when the phone rang. Reba just instinctively ran inside. She thought, this isn't going to be a long conversation. I'll quickly see who's on the other line. However, what had totally slipped her mind was the fact that in this garden was a disused well. This well was 22 feet deep. That is roughly the height of a 2-story house, or 2 London double-decker buses stacked on top of each other. Now, I'm not sure how long this phone call took, but when Reba went back outside into the garden, she was like, why is there only 4 children where is baby Jessica? Suddenly, she heard screams. The baby girl was at the bottom of the well, crying in terror. Now, instinctively, she tried to grab her baby, but realized she was far, far too deep into this hole. She raced to call emergency services, but when they got there, they realized this was going to be probably one of the most challenging rescue attempts they'd ever been involved in. This wasn't just a case of going down there and getting the baby, picking the child up, because this well was very narrow. Jessica had also completely wedged herself in. And it's not like the baby could help herself in any way. She was screaming, she was panicking, she could barely breathe because she had her hand squished up against her face. If you guys have listened to my podcast episode about the Nutty Putty Cave, you will know just how difficult rescue missions like this are. You can't drill down further because the child will just fall further. And you also can't go down to lift her out because the well is too narrow. It felt like the entire community raced over there. There were paramedics, police, the fire brigade. Time was running out, so they decided, let's actually make another hole next to the well. If we could make like a parallel tunnel, maybe we could crawl through and rescue her that way. Perfect, right? But they hadn't banked on just how rock hard the ground was. They had to get these special machines over there straight away to try and break through the terrain. It was back-breaking work for these men that were just trying tirelessly to get through. The hours and hours went by, and by now it was pitch black, and honestly the danger really for this little girl was that she might get hypothermia. So they came up with this plan. While some people drill the hole next to her, we need to pump air down to keep her warm, to save her from dying of hypothermia. But air alone wasn't going to keep her alive. Just keeping her warm wasn't going to cut it because she needed food and water. One of the most heartbreaking moments of this case for me was when they got a little microphone device down to little Jessica. They basically wanted her mum to be able to sing to her and comfort her, just like in the podcast episode of the Nutty Putty Cave. And it turned out little baby Jessica started singing Winnie the Pooh back to her mum. Now, men took it in turns using this exhausting jackhammer to try and reach the little child, and camera crews eventually got there and they were like live streaming the whole thing. As you can imagine, the entire nation held their breath when finally they reached little Jessica. But the problem was they still couldn't get her out. A paramedic came back up and was like, guys, I'm within touching distance. I can touch this little girl, but I'm afraid I'm going to break her bones if I try and pull her out. So the decision was made. Look, we either leave her in there to die or we pull her and risk breaking a bone. A broken bone can be fixed. The other option is we just leave her to die. They ended up slathering her in Vaseline and pulling her out at 10 p.m. The crowds were in floods of tears. It was honestly just such an amazing moment. She was pretty black and blue. She was raced to hospital for urgent medical attention and thankfully pulled through. She had to have one toe amputated because it had lost all of the blood circulation to it, but honestly it was a small price to pay for her life. But tragically, it wasn't all good news. Hero Robert O'Donnell, who actually had pulled the toddler out, really struggled to cope. He got PTSD. He ended up unaliving himself in 1995. And Jessica's parents really couldn't take the media attention and the stress of it all. So many eyes were on the family and people were calling for criminal charges. The parents ended up getting divorced from the stress of it all. There was never actually any criminal case. What do you guys think? Was this neglect or was this just a tragic accident? This is Jessica now. She's actually married with kids of her own.
This is the story of Tanya and Leon Tripp. LaTanya Janelle Carwell, which everybody just called her Janelle, was born on April 17th of 2001 in Palestine, Texas. Her family relocated to Augusta, Georgia shortly after she was born. And academically, Janelle was a great student. She excelled in science and math, aspiring to become a nurse or a doctor one day. And outside of school, she was very active in her local church, singing in the choir, participating in community outreach programs. She was known for mentoring younger students in her church youth group, and she actively participated in charity drives. Solid rap sheet. Janelle's mother, Tanya, informed the family that she was battling cancer, and being that Janelle is the oldest, Tanya relied on her the most. Janelle would cook, she would clean, she would make sure the house was in order, and everything was going smoothly until April 2015. That's when Leon Tripp was released from prison. Tanya and Leon had been knowing each other since they were teenagers. He had got locked up in 2009, and somewhere along that line, Tanya became his pen pal. All that writing turned into a relationship while he was in prison. Then the two got married while he was still in prison. So when he was released in April of 2015, he moved right to Augusta, Georgia, with Tanya and her children. In the beginning, Leon presented himself as a supporting partner and a father figure to Janelle, but that quickly changed when Janelle's actions started to shift at school. She started turning her assignments in late. Sometimes she wouldn't turn her assignments in at all. Her friends said that she wouldn't even talk about what was going on in her home anymore. In August of 2015, just 4 months after his release, the police was called on Leon. He had choked Tanya during a domestic dispute. Now, it's unclear who made this call, but he still didn't get put out that house. You literally just got out of jail. On April 18th, 2017, Tanya reported her husband and her daughter missing. She told the police that Leon got a call in the middle of the night from a friend that lives in Clarks Hill saying that his car broke down. And Leon asked Janelle to help him with his friend's car. And the two went to Clarks Hill, but she said they never returned. As the investigation is beginning and the search team is gathering, Tanya decides to go on Facebook Live and let everybody know that she's been battling with lung and brain cancer. She asks for funds to help find her husband and her daughter. Community volunteers search wooded areas and abandoned properties. They even had helicopters. In the following days, they brought out the cadaver dogs, but still no sign of Janelle and Leon. Tanya was making conflicting statements. One minute she'll say that Janelle left willingly with Leon. Then she would say that she was concerned for Janelle's safety with Leon. But suspicions started to rise. The neighbors told the police that they would hear Tanya and Leon arguing, fussing, and fighting all through the night leading up to the two disappearance. A witness even seen Leon loading up his truck the night before the two disappeared. That same truck was found on April 26, abandoned just a mile away from their home. The truck was taken in for processing and yield no information about the whereabouts of the two, but the cell phone data showed that these two never even made it to Clarks Hill. As their disappearance is spreading, police are getting tips of sightings of Leon in Atlanta, which is about 2 hours from West Augusta. He was actually on surveillance camera at a gas station or a stop and go, but Janelle was not with him. When the police actually seen him and seen that he looked like he was unharmed, alive, and well, they hit him with a kidnapping charge. Come to find out, Leon had made 2 or 3 trips back and forth while the police were actively looking for him. So now they really looking at Tanya sideways like, and you ain't seen him? Now, Tanya still was doing interviews and expressing her concerns about her missing daughter and her missing husband. Somebody even had asked her, do you think that they were in a secret relationship? And Tanya responded, all of this prettiness, and you think he will want to run away with our daughter? Come on now, that's stupid. That was a crazy thing to say. The kidnapping charge was May 1st, and the case kind of went cold after that. All the leads were dead ends, and knowing that Leon was traveling back and forth from Atlanta to Augusta, they started to focus more on Tanya. May 23rd, 2017, the U.S. Marshals in Atlanta decided to do a manhunt, an extensive search for Leon, and they found his ass at a U-Haul facility, but he wasn't by himself. Guess who was sitting passenger side? Tanya Tripp. They were both taken into custody, and Leon said that he never harmed Janelle. He said no, they didn't go to Clarks Hill. They instead went to Atlanta, but he gave Janelle money to get back on a bus to head back to Augusta, and that was the last time he seen her. Tanya said the only reason why she was with Leon is because she was looking for her daughter. She said that she was going to tell the police where he was. Mind you, the U-Haul truck was filled up to the brim with all of their shit. Since they didn't have enough evidence to charge Leon and Tanya with the disappearance and murder of Janelle because they didn't have her body, They charged Leon with kidnapping, and they charged Tanya with hindering the apprehension of a criminal. Almost 1 year later, behind an abandoned house in Richmond County, Georgia, in a shallow grave, was the remains of Janelle. She was found by somebody about to clean up and rebuild on the property. Her body was so badly decomposed, they really don't know how she died. They were saying asphyxia because it was a rope found next to her body or near her body. She only had a bra on when she was discovered. She died on her 16th birthday. Leon's charges went to first-degree murder, and Tanya's charges went to second-degree murder. Their trial got delayed for so long due to COVID and a bunch of other issues. But in June of 2020, more evidence came out that Tanya and Leon hired a hitman to kill Janelle on 3 occasions, in September and December in 2015, and one other time in October of 2016. Their trial finally started in February of 2026, and it was text messages between the two how they were going to handle Janelle. It was also evidence on the shovels in the back of Leon's truck. It had the same soil on it as where Janelle was found. On top of all of the other mountain of evidence they had on these two, they make me sick. They were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And I just want to know why. What was the reason? Why was she singled out like this? Because you had other children too. What kind of a piece of shit mother are you? But let's look at his record and why he was in jail in the first place. He was married to a woman named Chantel Tripp. She said that he was very abusive in their marriage and he would threaten the lives of her and her children. In 2002, he was charged with aggravated stalking and cruelty to children. He was sent to jail. In 2009, he violated his probation and got sent back to jail. Both of these charges was from his first wife. And then Tanya, you gonna marry him. He got out and he moved with you and your children. You pick me ass bitch. Chantel, I'm glad you got up out that jam. Tanya, bitch, I hope you rot.